Olá a todos, eu sou Fabio Goulart, professor e filósofo da página Filosofia Hoje.com, e no vídeo de hoje vamos para mais um Filosofia Hoje React, ou reagindo a vídeos, ou qualquer coisa do tipo, que eu vou assistindo um vídeo e fazendo ali algum comentário sempre que pertinente. Lembrando que já estou recebendo aí diversos pedidos, reage a tal vídeo, continue me mandando nos comentários.
Pode ser, reage ao vídeo do Cortella, do Clóvis, não sei o quê.
De algum outro pensador aí, é bem legal, é bem interessante, para ver o que eu penso disso, a gente manter uma relação a full, mas também pode ser vídeo de humor, de comédia, de besteira. Esse vídeo aqui eu gravei antes, mas gravei depois dos reacts que eu fiz do vídeo do Paulo Freire, né? E naqueles vídeos eu vi que eu tinha cometido um erro, né? Um erro bobão, que foi não ter usado isso aqui, ó, não ter usado fone de ouvido. E daí ficou um eco na gravação que agora não vai ficar. No vídeo de hoje, então, eu vou reagir a um vídeo da Universidade de Harvard. Harvard. É uma das maiores universidades aí do mundo, da formatura, mais especificamente, que lá teve o discurso de quem? De J.K Rowling. É exatamente a que escreveu o Harry Potter, ajudou na direção dos filmes também, né? Ou seja, o maior ícone da literatura pop da minha geração teve lá na formatura dos caras, né? Claro, Harvard tem dessas coisas. Mas, então, vamos assistir, vou reagir, eu sei que tem um monte de gente aí do canal que curte Harry Potter também, então já larga o like, já curte, já compartilha, já ajuda o canal a crescer cada vez mais, tudo de forma gratuita. Mas se você quer que eu melhore o microfone, a câmera, a qualidade aqui, me ajudar mesmo, né? Tem agora o apoia.se, onde você pode se tornar um apoiador com 1, 2, 10 reais, quantos reais você puder, e vai ter vantagens exclusivas, tá ok? Não pode falar tá ok, tá certo. Então vamos lá, vamos assistir a J.K Rowling. Olha o jeito que o professor ali bate a palma atrás. Começamos assim.
President Faust, members of the Harvard Corporation and the Board of Overseers, members of the faculty, proud parents, and above all, graduates. The first thing I would like to say is thank you. Not only has Harvard given me an extraordinary honor, but the weeks of fear and nausea I have endured at the thought of giving this commencement address have made me lose weight.
Nossa, velho, olha o que tem de gente, claro, né? Vem vir J.K Rowling, dar o discurso aberto, foi a universidade inteira e mais metade do estado, pelo visto, né?
A win-win situation. Now all I have to do is take deep breaths, squint at the red banners, and convince myself that I am at the world's largest Gryffindor reunion. Delivering a commencement address is a great responsibility, or so I thought, until I cast my mind back to my own graduation. The commencement speaker that day was the distinguished British philosopher Baroness Mary Warnock. Reflecting on her speech has helped me enormously in writing this one.
Tu vê aqui ela já tem toda a fama do mundo, né? Como eu disse, a maior escritora pop da geração, e a sua obra, o Harry Potter, já tem transcendido essa limitação pop, se tornado algo realmente cult, e daqui a alguns anos certamente vai ser lembrado assim, né? Mas ela aqui no discurso para a galera de Harvard, a primeira coisa que ela traz, que ela se lembra, que ela usa como ponto de partida, foi o discurso de uma filósofa britânica, uma professora lá da universidade dela, né, de tantos anos atrás, que vai marcar a vida toda dela. Lembrando, né, aquela minha crença aí, que eu já falei em outros vídeos, que a filosofia faz a diferença para a nossa vida. Vamos continuar, vamos ver o que a professora dela diz.
Because it turns out that I can't remember a single word she said.
Ela não lembra. Ah, deveria ter o
This
VHS lá.
liberating discovery enables me to proceed without any fear that I might inadvertently influence you.
E viu que, claro, ela está brincando, está fazendo aqui, né, o esquema TED de apresentação, mas de fato talvez ela não se lembre as palavras. Eu não me lembro o que foi dito na minha formatura, mas eu me lembro que foi importante e inspirador. Eu me lembro que de certa forma fez uma diferença. E vocês aí, se lembram do discurso da formatura de vocês?
To abandon promising careers in business, the law or politics for the giddy delights of becoming a gay wizard.
Tem gente que riu, mas certamente tem gente que não gostou,
You
né?
see, if all you remember in years to come is the gay wizard joke, I've come out ahead of Baroness Mary Warnock. Achievable goals, the first step to self-improvement. Actually, I have racked my mind and heart for what I ought to say to you today.
Agora que começa o sério, né? É o TED, esquema TED aí de apresentação.
I have asked myself what I wish I had known at my own graduation, and what important lessons I have learned in the 21 years that have expired between that day and this. I have come up with two answers. On this wonderful day when we are gathered together to celebrate your academic success, I have decided to talk to you about the benefits of failure. And as you stand on the threshold of what is sometimes called real life, I want to extol the crucial importance of imagination. These may seem quixotic or paradoxical choices, but bear with me. Looking back at the 21-year-old that I was at graduation is a slightly uncomfortable experience for the 42-year-old that she has become. Half my lifetime ago, I was striking an uneasy balance between the ambition I had for myself and what those closest to me expected of me. I was convinced that the only thing I wanted to do, ever, was write novels. However, my parents, both of whom came from impoverished backgrounds and neither of whom had been to college, took the view that my overactive imagination was an amusing personal quirk that would never pay a mortgage or secure a pension. I know the irony strikes with the force of a cartoon anvil now, but... So they hoped that I would take a vocational degree. I wanted to study English literature. A compromise was reached that in retrospect satisfied nobody, and I went up to study modern languages. Hardly had my parents' car rounded the corner at the end of the road than I ditched German and scuttled off down the classics corridor. I cannot remember telling my parents that I was studying classics. They might well have found out for the first time on graduation day.
Viu? Ela no caso, estava dizendo como se estivesse no moderno, no contemporâneo, naquilo que, dentro desse curso que não garante tanta grana das linguagens, da língua, seria o futuro mais certo, mas não, ela foi para os clássicos. E aqui sempre que eu digo, onde vocês vão estudar para tirar o melhor de vocês? É nos clássicos. Porque se os clássicos se tornaram clássicos, alguma coisa eles têm que os outros não têm.
All the subjects on this planet, I think they would have been hard put to name one less useful than Greek mythology when it came to securing the keys to an executive bathroom. Now, I would like to make it clear in parenthesis that I do not blame my parents for their point of view. There is an expiry date on blaming your parents for steering you in the wrong direction.
Cara, por exemplo, ela diz pobre ali, mas certamente em relação ao padrão brasileiro era uma família classe média baixa, né? não fez faculdade e tal, mas em Inglaterra. Eu nunca culpei meus pais por nada, porque assim, né, eu realmente era pobre, meu pai mecânico, minha mãe dona de casa, né, então realmente eu não tive, talvez, esse tipo de cobrança. Se eu tivesse trabalhando, ganhando salário, já seria uma vitória, cara, para minha família, e graças a Deus todos os filhos conseguiram isso, né, eu fiz a faculdade primeiro, depois a minha irmã, meu irmão, então assim, ó, tchê, eu acho que é tão assim, ó, culpar os pais, né? Ela diz ali tem prazo de validade, tem mesmo, né? No caso, eu nunca precisei fazer isso. E vocês?
The moment you are old enough to take the wheel, responsibility lies with you. What is more, I cannot criticize my parents for hoping that I would never experience poverty. They had been poor themselves, and I have since been poor. And I quite agree with them that it is not an ennobling experience. Poverty entails fear and stress, and sometimes depression.
Vocês viram que o discurso dela é extremamente coerente e realista, né? Quando a gente vê uma escritora que ficou famosa por falar do mundo fantástico, do mundo mágico, né? Quanto o discurso dela é pé no chão.
It means 1,000 petty humiliations and hardships. Climbing out of poverty by your own efforts, that is something on which to pride yourself, but poverty itself is romanticized only by fools.
Perfeito, né? Porque a beleza em si é romantizada apenas pelos touros. E como eu vejo isso aqui no Brasil, né? Cara, o pobre é pobre não porque quer, o pobre é pobre não porque acha legal ser pobre. É que tem todo um contexto social que coloca ele ali e que dificulta ao máximo que ele mude essa situação.
What I feared most for myself at your age was not poverty, but failure. At your age, in spite of a distinct lack of motivation at university, where I had spent far too long in the coffee bar writing stories and far too little time at lectures, I had a knack for passing examinations, and that, for years, had been the measure of success in my life and that of my peers. Now, I am not dull enough to suppose that because you are young, gifted and well-educated, you have never known heartbreak, hardship or heartache. Talent and intelligence never yet inoculated anyone against the caprice of the fates.
Aqui uma outra frase também muito impactante, muito importante, né? Talento nunca privou ninguém dos caprichos do destino. Não é porque você é talentoso que vai dar tudo certo.
And I do not for a moment suppose that everyone here has enjoyed an existence of unruffled privilege and contentment. However, the fact that you are graduating from Harvard suggests that you are not very well acquainted with failure. You might be driven by a fear of failure quite as much as a desire for success. Indeed, your conception of failure might not be too far removed from the average person's idea of success. So high have you already flown. Ultimately, we all have to decide for ourselves what constitutes failure. But the world is quite eager to give you a set of criteria if you let it. So I think it fair to say that by any conventional measure, a mere 7 years after my graduation day, I had failed on an epic scale. An exceptionally short-lived marriage had imploded, and I was jobless, a lone parent, and as poor as it is possible to be in modern Britain without being homeless. The fears that my parents had had for me and that I had had for myself had both come to pass. And by every usual standard, I was the biggest failure I knew. Now, I'm not going to stand here and tell you that failure is fun. That period of my life was a dark one, and I had no idea that there was going to be what the press has since represented as a kind of fairy tale resolution. I had no idea then how far the tunnel extended, and for a long time any light at the end of it was a hope rather than a reality. So why do I talk about the benefits of failure? Simply because failure meant a stripping away of the inessential.
Então ela não romantiza pé no chão, mas agora ela traz essa que o fracasso é o despojamento do que não é essencial. No fracasso a gente perde o essencial, mas perde também o que não é essencial. Pelo menos eu compreendo assim. E agora sim foi aquele momento de só escutar, porque foi um momento aí dela realmente contando a sua vivência.
I stopped pretending to myself that I was anything other than what I was, and began to direct all my energy into finishing the only work that mattered to me. Had I really succeeded at anything else, I might never have found the determination to succeed in the one arena where I believed I truly belonged. I was set free, because my greatest fear had been realized, and I was still alive, and I still had a daughter whom I adored, and I had an old typewriter and a big idea. And so rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life.
Então, no fracasso que ela teve, meio que pela necessidade, né, a motivação de dar a volta por cima, de sair do fundo do poço e de se dedicar àquilo que ela realmente queria, que a gente sabe o que é, né, o livrinho aí do nosso bruxo e tantos outros que vieram depois.
You might never fail on the scale I did, but some failure in life is inevitable. It is impossible to live without failing at something, unless you live so cautiously that you might as well not have lived at all, in which case you fail by default.
Viver como se não tivesse vivido, isso até me lembra Racionais. Eu duvido, né, que a J.K. Rowling tenha escutado Racionais, né, mas sei lá, cara, esse mundo é tão louco, né? Mas é aquela velha questão, viver pouco como um rei ou viver muito como um Zé. Aqui, o que ela está dizendo? Viver como Zé é fracassar por omissão, tá ligado?
Failure gave me an inner security that I had never attained by passing examinations. Failure taught me things about myself that I could have learned no other way. I discovered that I had a strong will, and more discipline than I had suspected. I also found out that I had friends whose value was truly above the price of rubies. The knowledge that you have emerged wiser and stronger from setbacks means that you are, ever after, secure in your ability to survive. You will never truly know yourself, or the strength of your relationships, until both have been tested by adversity. Such knowledge is a true gift, for all that it is painfully won, and it has been worth more than any qualification I ever earned. So given a time turner, I would tell my 21-year-old self that personal happiness lies in knowing that life is not a checklist of acquisition or achievement. Your qualifications, your CV, are not your life, though you will meet many people of my age and older who confuse the two. Life is difficult and complicated and beyond anyone's total control, and the humility to know that will enable you to survive its vicissitudes. Now you might think that I chose my second theme, the importance of imagination.
Então, antes dela começar o segundo tema, né, falando da importância do fracasso, vocês sabem, por exemplo, contar um pouquinho da minha vida, da minha história. Ok, garoto pobre, aquelas coisas ali que eu já falei, mas sempre muito estudioso, muito bom, sempre muito perfeito nessa coisa de estudar. E então eu consegui a bolsa na faculdade, a bolsa no mestrado, e estava vivendo disso ali meus 24 anos, 25, e achei que tranquilamente eu conseguiria também a bolsa no doutorado, pós-doutorado, e seguir essa vida acadêmica cheia de títulos, que não são exatamente a nossa vida, e muito menos salvam a nossa vida ou qualquer coisa do tipo. Estava muito estressado naquela época, não era fácil, mas era um caminho lógico a ser seguido. E eu tive o meu primeiro fracasso, posso dizer assim, embora assim como ela falou para os alunos de Harvard, esse fracasso para muitos seria um sucesso, foi quando não conseguia bolsa para o doutorado e não conseguiria pagar também, né? Então, aquilo ali, quando eu fracassei, não consegui a bolsa, eu, no princípio, me senti muito mal e etc. Mas eu pude me dedicar àquilo que, acima de tudo, eu gosto. Eu gosto muito mais de ensinar filosofia do que estudar filosofia. Esse é um fato, né? Eu gosto muito mais de ser professor do que ser filósofo, propriamente dito. Ser os dois, para mim, é a perfeição. Mas se eu tivesse que escolher um ou outro, escolheria, eu acho, ser professor. Aquele pequeno fracasso fez com que eu me dedicasse a lecionar, passei em 2 concursos públicos e hoje tenho a minha vida, de certa forma, organizada e segura. Não que eu não queira fazer o doutorado, quero sim e acho importante para mim, para a própria filosofia nacional, um dia me doutorar, mas eu não tenho mais aquela cobrança de antes, porque aquele pequeno fracasso me fez descobrir a minha verdadeira vocação.
Because of the part it played in rebuilding my life, but that is not wholly so. Though I personally will defend the value of bedtime stories to my last gasp, I have learnt to value imagination in a much broader sense. Imagination is not only the uniquely human capacity to envision that which is not, and therefore the fount of all invention and innovation. In its arguably most transformative and revelatory capacity, it is the power that enables us to empathise with humans whose experiences we have never shared. One of the greatest formative experiences of my life preceded Harry Potter, though it informed much of what I subsequently wrote in those books. This revelation came in the form of one of my earliest day jobs. Though I was sloping off to write stories during my lunch hours, I paid the rent in my early 20s by working at the African Research Department of Amnesty International's headquarters in London. There in my little office, I read hastily scribbled letters smuggled out of totalitarian regimes by men and women who were risking imprisonment to inform the outside world of what was happening to them. I saw photographs of those who had disappeared without trace, sent to Amnesty by their desperate families and friends. I read the testimony of torture victims and saw pictures of their injuries. I opened handwritten, eyewitness accounts of summary trials and executions, of kidnappings and rapes. Many of my co-workers were ex-political prisoners, people who had been displaced from their homes or fled into exile because they had the temerity to speak against their governments. Visitors to our offices included those who had come to give information or to try and find out what had happened to those they had left behind. I shall never forget the African torture victim, a young man no older than I was at the time, who had become mentally ill after all he had endured in his homeland. He trembled uncontrollably as he spoke into a video camera about the brutality inflicted upon him. He was a foot taller than I was and seemed as fragile as a child. I was given the job of escorting him back to the underground station afterwards, and this man, whose life had been shattered by cruelty, took my hand with exquisite courtesy and wished me future happiness. And as long as I live, I shall remember walking along an empty corridor and suddenly hearing, from behind a closed door, a scream of pain and horror such as I have never heard since. The door opened, and the researcher poked out her head and told me to run and make a hot drink for the young man sitting with her. She had just had to give him the news that in retaliation for his outspokenness against his country's regime, his mother had been seized and executed.
E depois tem gente que quer defender miliciano, o cara que defende tortura, esses militares ditador. Não importa o lado, não tem como defender esse tipo de gente em hipótese nenhuma.
Every day of my working week in my early 20s, I was reminded how incredibly fortunate I was to live in a country with a democratically elected government, where legal representation and a public trial were the rights of everyone. Every day, I saw more evidence about the evils humankind will inflict on their fellow humans to gain or maintain power. I began to have nightmares, literal nightmares, about some of the things I saw, heard, and read. And yet, I also learned more about human goodness at Amnesty International than I had ever known before. Amnesty mobilises thousands of people who have never been tortured or imprisoned for their beliefs to act on behalf of those who have. The power of human empathy leading to collective action saves lives and frees prisoners. Ordinary people whose personal well-being and security are assured join together in huge numbers to save people they do not know and will never meet. My small participation in that process was one of the most humbling and inspiring experiences of my life. Unlike any other creature on this planet, human beings can learn and understand without having experienced. They can think themselves into other people's places. Of course, this is a power, like my brand of fictional magic, that is morally neutral. One might use such an ability to manipulate or control, just as much as to understand or sympathise. And many prefer not to exercise their imaginations at all. They choose to remain comfortably within the bounds of their own experience, never troubling to wonder how it would feel to have been born other than they are. They can refuse to hear screams or peer inside cages. They can close their minds and hearts to any suffering that does not touch them personally. They can refuse to know. I might be tempted to envy people who can live that way, except that I do not think they have any fewer nightmares than I do. Choosing to live in narrow spaces leads to a form of mental agoraphobia, and that brings its own terrors. I think the willfully unimaginative see more monsters. They are often more afraid.
Bah. Aqueles que bloqueiam a imaginação veem mais monstros. Tá?
What is more, those who choose not to empathise enable real monsters. For without ever committing an act of outright evil ourselves, we collude with it through our own apathy. One of the many things I learned at the end of that classics corridor, down which I ventured at the age of 18, in search of something I could not then define, was this, written by the Greek author Plutarch.
Olha aí, autor grego Plutarco. Vamos ver a citação filosófica, sempre uma inspiração, sempre viva aí para J.K. Rowling, né? Eu acho os textos dela, embora sejam infanto-juvenis, muito gregos, muito platônicos, né? Então aqui, ó, o que conquistamos em nosso interior modifica a nossa realidade exterior. Né?
What we achieve inwardly will change outer reality. That is an astonishing statement, and yet proven 1,000 times every day of our lives. It expresses in part our inescapable connection with the outside world, the fact that we touch other people's lives simply by existing. But how much more are you, Harvard graduates of 2008, likely to touch other people's lives? Your intelligence, your capacity for hard work, the education you have earned and received, give you unique,
Cara de cartola, burguês safado. Burguês safado.
Even your nationality sets you apart. The great majority of you belong to the world's only remaining superpower. The way you vote, the way you live, the way you protest, the pressure you bring to bear on your government has an impact way beyond your borders. That is your privilege and your burden. If you choose to use your status and influence to raise your voice on behalf of those who have no voice, if you choose to identify not only with the powerful but with the powerless, if you retain the ability to imagine yourself into the lives of those who do not have your advantages, then it will not only be your proud families who celebrate your existence, but thousands and millions of people whose reality you have helped change. We do not need magic to transform our world. We carry all the power we need inside ourselves already. We have the power to imagine better. I am nearly finished. I have one last hope for you, which is something that I already had at 21. The friends with whom I sat on graduation day have been my friends for life. They are my children's godparents, the people to whom I've been able to turn in times of real trouble. People who have been kind enough not to sue me when I took their names for Death Eaters.
Não vou dizer nada agora.
At our graduation, we were bound by enormous affection, by our shared experience of a time that could never come again, and of course, by the knowledge that we held certain photographic evidence that would be exceptionally valuable if any of us ran for Prime Minister. So today, I wish you nothing better than similar friendships. And tomorrow, I hope that even if you remember not a single word of mine, you remember those of Seneca, another of those old Romans.
Outro filósofo, Sêneca, século I, né, contemporâneo de Jesus, era o filósofo mais influente do Império Romano naquela época. Que eu adoro Sêneca, hein? Vamos ver o que ele vai dizer aí.
I met when I fled down the classics corridor in retreat from career ladders in search of ancient wisdom. As is a tale, so is life. Not how long it is, but how good it is what matters.
Isso mesmo.
I wish you all very good lives. Thank you very much.
Então aí a gente viu o discurso da J.K. Rowling para um monte de burguês safado se formando em Harvard. Bom, certamente não foi só isso o vídeo, né? Espero que vocês tenham aproveitado. E assim como eu fiz os comentários aqui daquilo que estava assistindo, de forma sincera, espontânea, quero pedir que vocês façam o mesmo no espaço de comentários aí no Face, no YouTube. No YouTube, principalmente, que eu consigo acompanhar tudo bem direitinho, né? E o canal vai crescendo cada vez mais. Já curta, já compartilha, já envia para os amigos. Participe também do apoia.c e tudo aquilo que pode nos ajudar a fazer um canal ainda mais forte, unido, pelo uso da razão nesse nosso país. Da razão e sempre mantendo viva a imaginação, como a J.K. Rowling disse, sem romantizar a pobreza, a tristeza, a tragédia, mas sabendo utilizá-las como assim, molas, como mola, sabe? Sabe a mola do Sonic, aquela, para sair lá do fundo do poço. Bem isso aí mesmo, né? Como diz ali o Sêneca, não é a questão da extensão da vida, e sim da qualidade que a gente pode ter com ela. Certo? Obrigado, valeu e semana que vem tem mais. Até a próxima!